Good morning, class. This is Mrs. T. I'm sorry I can't be there right now. I am currently sick, but I'm still here to give you your lecture. Anyway, we're starting with a new chapter. I'm sorry if you hear baby T in the background. She's next to me and she's staring at me and laughing at me because I am talking to the laptop. Anyway, we're starting this new chapter, and this chapter is included in your test on Friday. Okay, so we will be talking about ecology. Okay, so ecology, what exactly is ecology? Let's see. Ecology is the study of how organisms interact with their environment. So that means the way you interact with plants, the way you interact with animals and other human beings. That is, when people study you, that's what we call ecology. Alright? Now, ecology includes two things. First off, we have the abiotic. That means those are the things that are non-living. And we have the biotic, which is living. So you and animals and plants, we are all biotic. Okay? But soil and water, they're the abiotic part of our environment. Now, in ecology, can be studied in many levels. That means it can go through the individual level, just like you as a human being, you're an individual. Population, so let's say the population here at Glendale Adventist Academy, if you're being studied, that can still be called ecology. Community, everyone in the community of Glendale. And of course, the ecosystem. So that means organisms in a particular ecosystem, just like a desert or a savanna. That means if those things are being studied, those are also considered ecology. All right? All right, so let's see what's next. Let's talk about species interactions. How do species interact with each other? First off, we have what we call food chains and food webs. Okay? The food chains and the food webs are able to describe how species eat other species. Okay? So, these feeding levels are what we call trophic levels. Okay? So that means from producers, okay? You have producers and then you have secondary consumers. Each of these are what we call a trophic level. Okay, so let's see. In this picture right here, we have a food chain. Okay, so that means decomposers. We have producers, okay, which produces the food. The producers then feed and are able to give nutrients to a primary consumer, in this situation, a deer. Now, this mountain lion is considered the secondary consumer. Now, let's say this organism dies, then the decomposers will be able to eat them. All right? Now, there are other ways that species interact with each other. One way is through competition. Competition occurs when two organisms are trying to fight for resources. So that means their territories are overlapping. And so they are using the same resources. Therefore, they have to fight to get it and to be able to survive. So that means, example would be two mountain lions living in the same territory. They have to fight and compete with each other to be able to eat the deer or whatever prey that they can find to be able to survive. Another type of interaction is symbiosis. Now, for symbiosis, what happens is species live close by with each other, but then, okay, what happens is them living next to each other, they have to deal with that. So there are different types of symbiosis. An example would be parasitism. For parasitism, what happens is the organism, okay, the parasite would tend to suck out the life from the host. Okay, so the parasite will gain something out of it. The host will not. The host will eventually die because all of its nutrients is being taken away by a parasite. Now, for commensalism, what happens is the commensalist would gain from the host, but the host will not die. That means it can survive without anything. It's not going to gain anything from the commensalist. And then finally, we have mutualism. Mutualism is when both organisms are sort of using each other to be able to survive. Okay? Alright, now, other species interaction, sometimes in a certain location, okay, there are species that are not naturally from there. Okay, we call this invasive species because they are introduced to a new habitat. Okay, now sometimes invasive species are introduced unintentionally, and sometimes the invasive species tend to outcompete or devour native species. So an example would be in Hawaii. In Hawaii, originally there are no, what do I call this? There are no predators. Okay? So that means they don't really have snakes, much snakes. They don't have a lot of cats. They don't have a lot of dogs. But as humans came in, they started introducing those animals. As a result, those animals tend to eat the native species. Okay, so they're considered the invasive species. Now, studies have shown that for communities to be more productive and be more stable, you should have what we call diverse communities. That means you should have different type of species. That way, those different types of species need different types of resources. And so those resources are not overused because let's say a deer would eat plants and bugs or dung beetles, they would eat dung. Okay, so they're not competing with their resources. And the tendency is if you have invasive species, they usually have a harder time to live successfully in a diverse habitat. All right? So, those are the species interactions that we have and we learn from ecology. Now, energy flow in ecosystems. For you to be able to survive, you need to have energy flow. Okay, so that means for an organism to be able to survive, you need to be able to grow, reproduce, and perform activities that are necessary for you to survive. Okay, now the amount of organic matter in any ecosystem is called the biomass. So you are part of the biomass. Grass is a part of a biomass. Plants, okay, trees, they are part of a biomass because they are organic matter. Now, the rate at which an ecosystem's producers produce the biomass is what we call the primary productivity. The reason why it's called primary productivity is because they're the producers. They are the base of your food chain. Okay, so before you go to the highest trophic level, you need to have producers to support that trophic level. Okay, now on average, only about 10% of the energy of a trophic level becomes available to the next level. So that means if a deer eats plants, out of 100% that they get out of it, only 10% is used as energy. The other 90% tends to become the uneaten organism, or they produce heat and is lost in the environment. You have feces produced, and energy is used to maintain the survival of the organism. Okay? So, during the energy flow from one trophic level to the other, as I said, some of this energy is lost. Not all of the energy that the organism gets, okay? Not all of that is taken by the organism. So, the reason for that is because for each energy transfer, you need chemical reactions. Now, for each chemical reactions that happens, the energy that is being used, some of them is lost to the environment. So, an example would be, let's say, you digesting food, okay? Before you can get some of the energy, your stomach needs to digest that, and through digestion, what happens is it produces heat. So that heat is then released to the environment. You actually feel that heat. So not all of the energy that you take from the food you get, not all of that is actually being used by your body for you to be able to survive. Again, only 10% of that energy is being absorbed by your body. Okay? Now, Since we're finished talking about energy transfer, now let's talk about ecosystems. Our planet is very diverse. That means you have different types of ecosystems. Okay? You have terrestrial and you have aquatic ecosystems. Now, for terrestrial ecosystems, we call those biomes. So if you look at this picture right here, you can see the different terrestrial ecosystem. You have tropical forest right here, okay? So you can see the diversity of biomes in our planet. Now, let's see. There are 8 biomes on Earth. You have tropical forests, you have temperate forests, you have coniferous forests, you have the tundra, savannas, temperature grassland, chaparral, and deserts. Okay? So, I know you're still copying, so keep copying. Okay? But for our planet, it's so diverse that depending on the temperature, it can vary. Your biome can vary. So, for example, in the United States, out of the 8, you actually have what? You have the desert, you have coniferous forest, you have temperate forest, you even have tropical forest, and you have tundra just in the United States. Okay? So that means in the United States and the North Americas, you have a lot of biomes. Okay? So, these are the ecosystems or the biomes on Earth. Okay, so again, this is terrestrial. Now, how about what's the next? What about aquatic? Okay, aquatic ecosystems include fresh water and salt water. Now, between the salt water and the fresh water, we have what we call an estuary. So we will talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so first, let's talk about what are the parts of freshwater and saltwater ecosystems. All right, let's see. Lakes and ponds, they are not salt water, they are fresh water. And they are divided into 3 zones. First off, you have the littoral zone. Right here, that's the littoral zone. Okay. The littoral zone is close to the water surface, as you can see right here, and close to the shore. Now, because it's very exposed to sunlight, this tends to be warmer. So the closer you are to the shore, the closer you are to the surface of the water, the tendency is the water tends to be warmer. Now, the farther you get from the shore, okay, then we have what we call the limnetic zone right here. Okay, so now it's far, far from the shore. Now for the limnetic zone, okay, some of the water is actually close to the surface. So this part right here, okay. So you see those dots? That's what we call planktons. Now planktons are important especially for fish because fish, they eat planktons to be able to survive, okay. And the deeper you go, then we go to the profundo zone. Profundo zone is the deep water habitats. And the tendency is you have a lot of debris here from all of the dead organisms from above. Alright? Okay, so this is the end of the part 1 of your lecture. Okay, so I will see you on the next part.